Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Shared Services Link and sponsored by HighRadius. Today, we're going to be looking at is order to cash being left behind? My name is Sarah Fain, and I am the head of content at Shared Services Link. And I'm delighted to be joined today by our expert panelist, JB Bernecki, the Management Consulting Senior Principal at Accenture, and Sam Dingra, the VP Digital Transformation and Business Development at HighRadius. We see that despite a lot of digital transformation efforts across finance and shared services, sometimes order to cash feel like it's being left behind, that you're spending a lot of time chasing payments and it can be difficult to predict cash flow and it has a negative impact on morale as well. So Shared Services Link and HighRadius conducted a survey recently, and this will be sharing the results of that. So we want to explore what some of the top goals are of order to cash professionals, where order to cash professionals can really laser focus their priorities to be more successful, and how advanced technology like AI are being rolled out in order to cash. So diving into the first finding of the survey is we want to understand what the main goals with order to cash professionals are for the next 12 months. 44% said that they wanted to reduce manual touch points significantly. 42% said they wanted to decrease debt and overdue collection. So those are by far the top two, and the top four are around optimizing cash flow and offering a high quality customer experience. Just working down the list, you can see others wanted to keep the department lean and scalable, bring in process owners, minimize risk, and plug revenue leakage and outsource order to cash or parts of it. What jumps out to me here is that manual cash flow and manual order to cash processes haven't gone away. A lot of companies just yet aren't digital, and reducing manual touch point is the main goal. So JB, if you could talk a little bit more about how these findings seem to you and how they reflect your work with clients at Accenture as well.
Yes, of course, Sarah. I'm part of actually a practice that focuses on working capital management. So optimization of order to cash is one of our key elements. And, we do a lot of projects where we're looking at process and technology to try to optimize them. One thing that I like about these three main goals, it's also linked to some of the studies we actually do ourselves. And one of the key questions we ask the CFOs is, what are they trying to do in the area of order to cash? And 73% of those CFOs responded last year that they want to retool the order to cash process. So that means they want to invest in new solution. And investing in the new solution is just not about automation or reducing manual touch points, as we see on the first line here, but it's also at the same time a good opportunity to improve the processes, try to improve the way you're measuring, try to improve the way you're managing data across the end-to-end process. And we'll see in the study that difficulty with order to cash is very fragmented. There's a lot of people involved, a lot of different types of information. CFOs want to invest in this and make sure that all of this is improved. The reason we're here today as well is in the past, if you look a little bit at history, companies invested a lot on ERPs, maybe did some acquisitions. So in the end, you end up with a very complex landscape where you have different legacy systems and different people that have different processes. And today we're at a point where sometimes it's a little bit difficult to understand how the order to cash process works. And so again, it's an opportunity here to invest and try to streamline all of this. In the end, you want to improve your processes, your controls, and your technology through these type of projects. The second point I want to make here, and it's also interesting because this is the second and third point that we see here. Working capital is important. Cash is king. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, but obviously because of the overall situation, we had COVID, so it put a lot of stress on companies' cash. Now we have the uncertainty with Ukraine, so it forces again companies to look at how can I create more cash. And working capital, of course, is one of the main elements, and one of the main contributors to cash is also the order to cash process, because here, of course, you're wanting to have that under control. Very difficult from an order to cash perspective, again, because fragmented, a lot of different elements that you need to control. And it's all about housekeeping. On a day-to-day basis, I need to collect. On a day-to-day basis, I need to make sure that I have the right payment terms. It's funny that they mentioned standardized payment terms, because try to do this exercise in your own company. I'm sure if you ask the question, do you have standard terms? Everybody's going to say yes. Well, do the simple analysis of looking at how many terms do I actually have, and you're going to see that you might think you have 80% of your spend that is under 30 days net. Actually, you might realize it's a lot lower than that. And again, here, because you have all these manual processes, all these lack of visibility, lack of controls, this is making the whole process a lot more difficult. And we're seeing this really in our projects, that this focus on collections, focus on terms, focus on working capital is a real big focus for 2022 and 2023. Last thing I'll say here, end-to-end ownership, important as well. Again, fragmented process, so you need to make sure that from a company level, you do have somebody that is responsible of the order to cash process. That means that can talk to sales, can talk to supply chain, and can talk to finance. And this is one of the key elements that where companies that have better working capital here are successful. And of course, having the right tools and reporting to support that is very important.
I'll try to kind of just share some complementary points. You covered quite a lot of good points. This question, with time, the ranking changes. One thing which remains constant always is the manual effort involved. I've been in this business for 7 years now, and yes, that kind of always is in the top 3. But based on the economic situation, as you rightly said, we are seeing a lot of focus on cash flow, and companies are being a bit cautious now in where they invest money because everybody is looking at the cash, and that is based on the forecast for next year, and the caution is kind of impacting the investments accordingly. A couple of different trends. If we look at last 2-3 years, we saw the tying order to cash to the customer experience was picking up significantly, especially in the industries which were B2B and moving towards B2B2C and D2C direct as well. So if you look, most of the big apparel firms are doing a lot of direct to consumer business. Because of COVID, it kind of fast tracked and leapfrogged by 5 to 10 years. And that brought a lot of focus on customer experience within order to cash as well. So that was a big trend we saw in last 2 to 3 years. And the latest that we are seeing again is because of the economic pressure. Compliance has kind of taken priority over everything else within order to cash as well. If there's anything to do with, let's say, credit management or order management and the compliance around it, that is becoming like a top priority and going way over the ROI and removing the manual efforts involved in the other activities, purely because of the focus that has taken up on the compliance side. So the top 3 that we have been seeing more recently have been around cash flow, have been around compliance and customer experience, which was for last 2-3 years, in addition to the constant of manual touch points.
So what I'd like to dive into next is a little bit more on what might stop you from meeting the goals that we just discussed. So we asked our respondents, it's manual touch points that's keeping them from doing a lot of these more value-adding tasks that they want to do. But the next ones you see down the list really speak around fragmentation. 42% said that sales and finance don't work together. 36% said it's too fragmented. Another 36% said they don't have process ownership or a GPO set up. And 35% said too many systems to log into. So, I mean, if you lump those in together, I'm sure there'd be some overlap, but fragmentation is a huge issue alongside the manual processes. Looking down the list a little bit more, we see, challenges with tech systems, not getting the right metrics, data, always a bit of a headache, low value tasks, senior buy-in, lack of leadership, poor visibility, or poor relationship with BPO. But really that's the tail end, and most people are seeing issues around manual processes and fragmentation. So I'd like to bring you and JB and kind of what you think this might mean from like a CFO perspective.
Yeah, if I look at the results of all this, in the end, for me, the main theme is, as you were saying, fragmented. And for me, in the end, the order to cash process is always going to be fragmented. You're always going to have sales, you're always going to have finance, you're always going to have supply chain that need to work together. So the question more is, how do we fix this? Is around, and from a CFO perspective, he probably wants to say, what is my visibility upon my end-to-end process? Do I have a clear view of how my sales is performing in helping in collections? Do I have a clear view in how I'm collecting, how quickly I'm collecting, the amount of overdue? Another simple question ask around in your organization, how much overdue do you have? You'll realize that a lot of people actually don't know the percentage of overdue you have in your organization. How many disputes do I need? How much value is stuck in disputes? And if I was CFO, okay, I know my process is fragmented, but having the visibility end to end of everything should be something that is feasible, even if I have different systems, even if I have different processes and different legacies, right? So I think this is one of the underlying things that come out of this, these different difficulties. In manual processes, yes, it's one of them. It's one of the contributions to the whole thing. I think the second point here is we're talking about technology, but also a process perspective. Very important to have strong processes, because sometimes I see companies spend millions in new technologies, but having the right processes in place is also very important. Simple example, with a client that wanted to improve their invoicing, the quality of the invoices they were generating. So we worked on the integration between the sales solution, the contract solution, putting information into the system to have the right invoices generated. But in the end, all of this is automated, yes, but the actual input comes from sales. And the only way here is to train sales correctly so that they put the information into the contract system. So all of that flows into your invoicing system. So you always need to think that, technology is one factor, but your processes are another one. Visibility, so data is really important. So compliance on data is really important. Quality of data is important. And, all of these different things you should think when trying to optimize your order to cash process.
Yeah, some interesting points there, JB. And you talked about that whole more silo approach, right? So if you're trying to optimize one process in silo, you may bring in a solution, refine the process in silo. But if it doesn't talk to the second one, complementary one, it is going to break at the union point. And you took a very classic example of sales and finance. We see that with sales, customer service, logistics. So if it's credit, it's more sales and finance. The moment you talk about, let's say, deductions or dispute management, you have to bring in all those other departments as well. And the challenge usually is, yes, for order to cash team, a solution can solve the problem. The question becomes, what's in it for those other departments to come on that same solution? Because they are usually going into some other platform. So connecting with different platforms and bringing a unified view, as JB mentioned, is definitely one of the areas where a lot of companies find it a challenge. And it starts from the ground up. If you look at the core, the ERPs are fragmented, which is also mentioned here, too many systems, too many tools. And then when you come on top, the actual layer where users go in or where the execs go in, those are also too many. So the more you can unify them, the better visibility and better decision making happens. And what we have kind of seen is with the evolution of GBS, it varies as well. So companies which have a mature GBS organization, they have kind of already tried to unify it quite a bit, right? Centralization of as many processes as possible, let's say, and then centralization of the solutions as well. Whereas if you go to a company which is more decentralized, there the challenges are even more. So depending on the type of maturity of their overall process and the centralization, how they go and approach it kind of varies. Yes, technology can help fast track certain cases, but at the same time, some companies have to take slow steps because it's a too big of a jump for them. So it's a very interesting problem, and it varies from company to company. And understanding those specifics about their system landscape, their people landscape, and process landscape before we propose any change is critical. And those are typically the areas where they find challenges or what stops them from meeting the goals from what we see in the market.
Well, thanks so much, Sam and JB. Really interesting points there. And I think a lot of this, we suspect a process owner, a strong process owner, could make a really big difference.
All the companies I work with today, they tend to have more and more of these order to cash process owners. I would say the next step is a lot of times they have a very strong responsibility and understanding of the invoice to cash process. So really starting from the invoicing to cash. And I see more and more this expanded view on the actual ordering, so even lead to order process, so more from a sales perspective. So really having everything end to end, but it's still, a little bit new, and companies are still working a little bit in silos, having, sales still being at the beginning of the process, and then, having a strong process owner for the back end.
We wanted to just dive into a little bit about what we think can actually help companies be more successful. So we asked our audience, which of the following do you think could help? So again, it's almost the exact same percentage of people who said they struggle with automated processes, want to see more automated processes, no surprise. And again, the next ones tie into processes and fragmentation. 45% said they want to see a better partnership between sales and finance. They want to see more, 44% want to see more streamlined processes, and 43% want better technology to support AR or order to cash. So again, those four really stand out to me as the top four. And then just looking down the list a little bit, about a third of people want more budget, 29% a better ERP environment. Further down the list, we see visibility of customers, having a global process owner with more authority, more time from IT, more support from leadership, or more resources or a larger team. So again, it comes a little bit down to, the people, processes, technology, but it's getting the right technology and tighter processes to really tackle these immature processes.
Very expected results, if I may say so, kind of reaffirms what we are discussing with a lot of our prospects and customers as well. I think we talked at length about, let's say, the fragmented nature between sales and finance and streamlining of processes. If I talk about the next few points here, just to kind of shed a bit more light, we are seeing actually with a lot of companies, especially with moves happening to the latest version of SAP or latest version of Oracle, there's always that question, what stays within ERP and what processes are optimized by bringing a technology outside of that. And that's where usually the whole what can we get extra and what do you get extra outside of ERP is always a question where business owners and people from operations and the business side have that internal discussion, right? And it's always about AI, NLP that you've kind of listed there. We call it autonomous now, like processes that can morph themselves now using AI and using NLP at the back of it. And that's really where applications like HighRadius are being discussed with different companies. We saw a big, let's say in the last decade, if I talk about it, a lot of companies went into the RPA school of thought. There was a sort of like a competition, if I may call it, in terms of how many bots does a finance department in a company have, or in general a company has. But that is kind of now coming to a different curve, and companies are kind of looking towards something which is much more broader and integrated in nature and kind of solves a bigger problem rather than just solving one small problem and adding a lot of maintenance. So those two aspects of looking beyond RPA and looking beyond ERP is something that we are definitely seeing as a trend, and more companies are now looking at how can we make it more futuristic, how can we go and solve the customer experience problem which we talked about through an integrated technology which is outside of ERP. JB, you want to add something on that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, in the end, if you talk about automation, maybe your ERP is going to bring 40 to 50% of automation. There's still a big gap and still a big improvement that needs to be done. And this is why you have solutions on top of that. One of them is HighRadius. And before this, you were mentioning RPA, but this is where everybody was going to try to automate a little bit more than the typical ERP area. I would see one trend here is that, yes, and it comes back to one of my original statements, is that the CFO is looking to invest now in order to cash. There is one mistake they have to, especially in the order to cash process, is again, it's coming back to very fragmented, a lot of different elements, and there's a temptation to say, let's try to optimize each and every one bits of the process. Because today you can find a solution for every bit. You can find a solution that is specialized in credit risk. You can find a solution specialized in cash application. So maybe you can buy, one of the elements that is best of breed for each small part of the process, but of course that's going to bring potentially even more complexity, data management, etc. So you have to be very mindful when you're looking to invest on what you're choosing and what is best for you and what brings more value to your process in the end.
And I think it's a really good way to look at the process as a whole and not getting too bogged down into the details of each individual element of your process. And again, where a process owner with authority can make a really big difference. So we've got two more data slides before we start talking about solutions and way forwards. I know we've already hinted at some, but we've got two questions here, which I'll read through, about how AI are being rolled out in order to cash. So we wanted to ask people if they're aware of some of even the more advanced elements of AI in order to cash. I think everyone knows there's some application, but you can see this quote in the bottom here about, do you know that how AI can do things like reduce age debt, improve collections, move deductions to a touchless process, liaise with your customers, improve your KPIs, organize a work list. Overall, it looks quite encouraging. 40% of people said that they're very aware about how AI can do these things, 21% said mainly aware, 31% that they're somewhat aware, and only 8% said that they're not aware. But then what we do is we just dove a little bit deeper and asked people what they actually think AI-based tools can do to help you improve. And here we seem to see, just a bit of a differentiation of what people think AI can do and autonomous tools are actually doing today. So 61% of people appreciated that AI can free up the time of your team, removing manual workload. 7% said it can add to analytical capabilities, and over 50% said that it can speed up and enhance predictive capabilities. So again, the top ones here are really about kind of the speed and analytics. And working down the list, fewer people think it can automate cash application, improve customer relationships, automate the whole process end to end, and only 37% ticked that it can do things like reduce bad debt and prevent leakages.
It's always interesting, right? Because when it comes to AI, it's about those specific use cases that AI solves, right? There is a lot of talk about AI. So maybe a question, right, for audience. Do you think that AI is helping, let's say, to read emails, pick up the intent of emails and create actions automatically out of those emails? Do you think such a technology is out there, available, specific to collections?
So overall, the quick responses in are generally positive, that people do believe it can, and that they're seeing lots of intelligent document processing technologies out there. So I think people are aware of it, but perhaps not in their department is kind of what's quickly coming through.
Great. And yeah, like document reading technology has been existing for some time. And even there are so many different types. But when it comes to reading an intent of an email, so just to give a specific example, right, a promise to pay can be captured automatically. A dispute can be created automatically just based on the intent of an email or an intent of a phone conversation that you have with your customer. I just wanted to share these couple of use cases that we solve just to kind of highlight that's where the technology is right now. And it's really interesting to learn that a lot of our audience is actually aware of such use cases. That's actually very good. And what you mentioned here, how those kind of use cases impact then these KPIs, for example, cash flow, the bad debt that we're talking about, that's where the actual process linking a solution and actual KPI because of the improvement of that process through a technology plays a role.
As you rightly said, I think we have to be clear that AI is not automation, right? It's something that is sort of helping on top of automation, helping people on their day-to-day job. And you gave a good example of reading an email, creating an action, basically. In Accenture, we also use it in other areas, also around the reporting. Big corporates to create very complex reports to actually get the information compiled together and check already if there is some issues in those reports to flag them to the controller. And you can do that, from if you're building your cash flow reports, for example, from an order to cash perspective. And also, on the order to cash side, you can also work with AI on risk assessing, some of your clients, checking if they're actual clients and there's a potential risk for them to be paying some of your invoices. So you can have tools that can also help. But again, it's not really automation. It's something that is doing some side tasks and then proposing that for you to review and helping basically the people that work in this area to be more effective in what they do and reduce some of the risk and compliance that you have across the process.
So what we're going to do now is I'm going to quickly kind of recap on the findings from our survey, and then we're going to go into some practical ways to move forward on this. So again, what we saw, manual processes and fragmentation as the top problems, but responses are quite widely distributed into what people thought AI could do. Improving speed and analytics were popular choices, and the right technology with people working together on tighter processes is how people want to improve their department. And we've also discussed really interesting trends today around, cash flow, compliance, customer experience, and looking at the process as a whole and not just zooming in and fixing kind of nitpicking process problems, but rather zooming out and the power of a true process owner. So, automation is a clear way to start tackling these and removing the manual element of the process. But where can you automate for the maximum impact? And how do you even start figuring out where to start? So Sam, I'd like to turn to you for this please first.
Thank you, Sarah. This question is very interesting because there's no one size fits all answer. You have to look at the people, process, and technology system landscape, all three landscapes of a particular company before you kind of figure out where is the maximum impact or where do you start with. There are some best practices that we have learned over the years, so based on a specific industry or a specific region, geographic region, I mean. There are some areas that are, let's say, known that they'll have a bigger impact. For example, if it's a high volume, low value industry, like a consumer good industry, stuff like cash application, deductions have a significant impact. And it's usually a bigger problem because the volume of transaction those industries kind of process in these areas is huge. But as I said, suddenly if compliance wise they have any issues, suddenly the focus would shift on order management, invoice management, credit management, because they have a significant implication on their overall compliance. So some of those things vary. And then the other aspect is their overall journey. Some companies could still be as manual as they are doing things on paper and in Excel. And for them, step one could be moving into digital world. Whereas companies, I can't names, but there are companies, let's say the fastest growing ride sharing companies like those, they are already on autonomous because as a company, they are always leading from the front on the digital evolution, and order to cash is no different in that overall evolution. So it varies by the maturity of the company, the overall people, process, and system landscape that they are on, and the priority based on their industry. Typically, that's what we see. A lot of companies work with companies like Accenture or any other consulting firm to kind of help them find that out. Some companies have their internal transformation teams to find that out. And some companies work with software providers like us directly to find that out. So the path to get there could be different depending on how the organizations are structured and how they operate. But eventually, it does need that review before you find that first answer.
I guess it's a little bit like Sam was saying, right? There needs to be a end-to-end approach to where do I find the maximum impact. First is, do I have a clear view of what my processes look like? What are the different steps? Where do I think is my major pain point from a process perspective? So Sam was mentioning a cash application, collections potentially, but can I put a value against that? Because there's no need to spend a lot of time automating areas that are not going to bring you a lot of benefits, working capital wise, or from a more financial impact. So you need to be able to create that business case and then be able to figure out what is this automation really gonna bring to me. So automation and what is the root cause of those issues. So collection, we redefine a lot of collection strategies to make it more effective, try to work to make the life of the collector a lot easier. But the root cause of that might be that your invoices are just bad quality. A lot of the issues of collection is just, oh, but Mr. Client, actually you didn't receive the right invoice. So, did I really understand the end-to-end again, the process, and where then do I try to focus some of the automation to bring the most value to my process?
Is there anything that you think maybe people miss, or maybe they're not looking at the whole process? Are there any kind of commonly missed things that you see people do when they're mapping process, or any advice that you would give people on the line today?
I'll be intrigued to see what JB says, but when we get into an assessment, I would say 50% of our prospects or clients, they do not have an end-to-end process defined. And then it's a journey for us to kind of co-build that process. There'll be parts and parcels of it that exist, but the end-to-end process is rarely mapped. Or as I said, 50% of the cases we will find that it is mapped because they may have worked on a project or worked with some partner to get there. But 50% we kind of co-build that with them.
Exactly. I mean, in the end, you would think that a lot of companies have this really set in stone, but it's not a lot of the time the case. Most of the time, they would have bits and pieces that would have been documented, but having a clear framework, defined, and that helps as well. And again, in the methodology to what types of technology do I actually need? What part of the process do I want to automate? Having a standard framework across the organization, clearly defined and clearly communicated, helps a lot. I would say that the second point I want to make here is we're saying end-to-end process. So that means with the sales as well, right? So we need to have everybody involved again, and they need to be a contributor to this process. So if you're redesigning some of your processes, you always have to think that you need to bring other parts of the organization. It cannot be done in silo or just in the finance community, because then you're missing out on a big opportunity to optimize and redo in some of these processes.
And it's not that easy either, right? Typically with these companies, there is some centralized processes, some decentralized processes, some processes outsourced, some processes within the departments. So it's actually really difficult to have the full end-to-end view. And they keep changing as well, because these are big organizations. There's something changing pretty much every year or other year. So maintaining those itself is a task.
Yeah, no, it's a continuous improvement. And if it was easy, we would be all out of business, right? So it's a continuous activity to try to understand where the issues are and what needs to be improved.
What are kind of the next steps you should be taking now?
I think first step is to kind of analyze whether the problems are known or not. Some problems are usually known, and those should definitely be looked at. A lot often we find out some problems are there but are not known. And it could be based on different reasons. It could be because it's not a problem for that department. It is kind of passed on to another department. We see that especially when, let's say, the budgets are moved because of the recovery of disputes that, let's say, a receivables department does. Something is written off, can be written off from a marketing budget. So it's actually a problem for a marketing and sales department, not so much of the receivables department. But for the company, it's still a problem. I'm just giving you that as an example to highlight sometimes those problems are slightly hidden. And for those, doing an internal assessment or an assessment with a company like us or a company like Accenture kind of helps in identifying those problems or highlighting those problems. Because sometimes they may look small, but when you dig deeper, they can look very, very big. A lot of companies define, for example, DSO, DDO differently. And the moment that they change it, it gives a bit more color to what the real DSO is, for example, or the real overdue situation is. And I think one other aspect is benchmarking with similar peers. That helps a lot as well, because sometimes you may not know certain areas of improvement unless you compare yourself with a peer who is in the same business. And that's what sometimes gives more ideas of opportunities, because it's not just the problems that you solve, it's also the opportunities that you're after, which can kind of improve either the margins or profits for the organization.
I agree, definitely. I'm trying to understand where the problem is, and especially, bring a value against that problem, because that's also good also for internal communication to try to understand how much value am I going to get out of this. So very important to work on that. Benchmarking is a good point as well, Sam, right? Because it helps to see a little bit where you are and how well you're performing. We were talking about payment terms earlier. Benchmarking what others have in terms of payment terms also helps you to see, what type of optimization am I doing? Am I actually doing good inside of my organization? It helps as well to put more pressure maybe on sales, in this case, to go the next step in terms of getting those working capital gains that you're looking for. So going a little bit through all these different steps of methodology helps in reducing these manual process implementation in the future and bringing the whole company to improve some of these processes.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to bring this up on the screen, Sam. I don't know if you want to just comment on it quickly. We just asked the team at HighRadius for an example of what the next steps might look like if you were looking to do a maturity assessment overview.
Sure. So typically a maturity assessment would have some of our specialists. So this, for example, is an example of a maturity assessment of cash application, which is more straightforward than some other processes. Some of our experts would work with you to kind of understand what your current team structures are, the system landscapes that I talked about, the different parts of cash application process. How do you get remittance, different sources in which you get remittance, and how much of that is automated. And then using that and applying a framework that we've built over the years, they would essentially rate you on either lagging, formative, progressive, or visionary. And you'll get a sense and a report card in a way to understand where do you stand in the overall cash application process with the detailed data behind it. So it kind of helps you start identifying if that is a problem, and if it is a problem, how much is it a problem and what should you do about it. That's sort of the report card, simply put, that the maturity assessment produces.
Thank you so much to our speakers, Sam and JB. You're superstars. I always learn so much when I speak to you. So thank you for taking the time today and for sharing your knowledge with our audience. Thank you very much, and goodbye.